for the democratic movement to gain victory. Iranian regime has multiple forces of oppression and security forces. There is intelligence ministry, there is parallel intelligence organization within Revolutionary Guards. There is Revolutionary Guards in addition to the regular army, and the Revolutionary Guards have the main task of maintaining order. Judiciary has its own law enforcement. There is law enforcement, there is police, there is just enormous number of people whose living essentially is coming from doing security job, if you like. In terms of Western role in these movements, in case of Egypt and probably some extent Tunisia and other Arab countries, generally it's very considerable influence, but very complex as well. Generally, the West's strategy has been to slow down as much as possible the movement in order to arrange their forces, their people on the ground, and trying to make the movement into a protracted and tiring process. But making symbolic concessions in critical times, for example, Mubarak's departure, which somehow seemed to take the steam out of the movement. And I think that's a very dangerous thing to happen. And I hope, and I hear from Rami and Hannah that people are still out trying to make sure the change is happening. So overall, I think the movement's weakness in case of Iran is that because the reformists have no social economic agenda which is radically different or sufficiently different from the existing regime's agenda, they simply haven't been able to rally the poor and the workers. And somehow there are now two movements in Iran. There are sporadic but consistent strikes in major industrial cities and plants, and there is this ad hoc democratic protests seeking release of political prisoners, the release of opposition leaders which are now under house arrest, the freedom of media and association and these kind of things, but no economic demands, no rallying cry around the fact that 40% of Iranian urban population is living under poverty line. The Iranian prison population report last week says that has gone up by 50,000 within the last 1.5 years, without an inch being added to prison space in Iran. So you can imagine what sort of process is at work. So in terms of overall characterization, I would say that in case of Egypt, you have a kind of, at least at this current stage, and I hope that won't remain so, but I think it's a kind of revolutionary reformism. A huge revolution has been happening, but because it hasn't seized the state power and direct instruments of implementing those demands now being carried out by essentially organs of the old regime, particularly the army. Now, whether they will this carry out to the end is really a matter of whether the popular pressure will be enough. On the other hand, Iran is different because it began with a highly reformist agenda, but it's increasingly getting revolutionized and radicalized. As we speak, there is huge debates within the so-called Green Movement about, leaving behind this soft kind of softly approach to the government, the fact that there is nothing can be achieved within this existing leadership, and increasingly radical voices taking over. And I think if successful, I think that would only help the movement in the rest of the Middle East. In the same way that the movement in Egypt and Tunisia has actually reinvigorated this appetite for radical action in Iran. If in Iran we get somewhere beyond this reformism, that would play into the hands of the movement in Egypt and elsewhere. I think there is a lot for Iranian Green Movement to learn from what's been happening in the Arab Middle East in terms of these are regimes which even reform seems to require revolution. And if you want to do radical change, then you have to organize. And you have to have a clear vision of what is demanded, and also the social and political energy for a sustained movement requires the widest possible mobilization, which in case of Iran hasn't happening, simply because the poor don't identify with the slogans of the reform movement. And so long as these huge numbers of the Iranian population simply feel outside of this movement, it's very unlikely, given the might of Iranian regime's security apparatus and its social basis, any radical change will happen. But if it happens, I think the collapse of state system, which Rami alluded to, will be quite dramatic, because imagine Saudi Arabia in the Middle East, surrounded by democratic societies, and the fall of Saudi Arabia is something which its implications for United States, for European Union, and for the whole capitalist system could be quite immense. So let's hope that these movements coalesce and produce something great. Thank you.
Okay, we have a bit of time, and I can imagine that there are many people who want to make their point, who want to ask some questions. Is it okay if I propose that we have, let's say, 4 or 5 questions, and then we ask the panel, whoever from the panel wants to respond to them, to come back? So who can I give the floor?
Yeah, I have a question for whoever, really. Everybody can answer. The last speaker talked about how the Iranian regime has some social base, which means that there are people that are, coming from the revolution, which means that there are people that are very dedicated and supportive of it. And I'm wondering whether there is a similar situation that we have to grapple with in the Libyan example, that there is to a certain extent, Gaddafi did come to power through a revolution against the king, and I think it has confused in the West. There's some sections of the old left that come out with crazy stuff like around Gaddafi, right? And this kind of sense that they're still backing Gaddafi and that he is the leader of the revolution, all that kind of stuff. And where the speakers think that there is some kind of reality on the ground in Libya coming out from that revolution, or whether that's completely crazy.
No, important point. We certainly pick it up. Who else? Yes, please.
Let's start with the role of the army. As a woman in the field regime, how committed do you think it really is to real reform parliamentary?
Just in the various countries?
In Egypt, in particular.
Or in Egypt. So how committed is the army to real reform? Lawrence.
I would like to know why now. When it really came up, why 2010, why 2009 or 2012?
Yeah, that's Her Majesty's question. More questions?
Do you think reform in the Middle East is meaningful unless we actually bring about reform in the West? Because the Western governments are so involved in all the shit that's gone down in Africa and Central America. They're the ones you've got to get there. Otherwise, it's all meaningless.
Point?
I just wanted to ask a bit about the events the last few days in Egypt, where the army appears to have been kind of actively on the side of the thugs who've been attacking Copts and attacking the demonstrators in Tahrir Square. And that seems kind of inconsistent with the fact that the army quite recently seemed to be taking a lurch in the direction of the revolution and promising that they wouldn't attack protesters anymore. The new Prime Minister has talked about counter-revolution, implying that he's on the side of the revolution. So where are the army at in Egypt right now? It's kind of confusing to me.
Okay, I think if you can keep it for a second. Whoever wants to answer first to any of these 5 questions.
I can go.
Run?
Yeah.
Please use the microphone as much as possible,
Yeah,
because
sure.
I think that helps for the registration.
I try and go through them all, but I'll start with Andrew first. I think there's a point of confusion. In Iraq, when they dissolved the army in Iraq, which was a decision taken by Bremer, if you remember this gentleman, who decided it's a good idea to dissolve the Iraqi army overnight. There's an analogous situation in Egypt. This, if you noticed 2 days ago, the internal state security in Tunisia was dissolved. One of the main requests of the revolution in Egypt is that the internal security in Egypt be dissolved. And I told you it's 1.3 million people. Now, if those people are suddenly not just out of a job, but they are pariahs in the society, you're saying is the army is colluding with the thugs against the demonstrators. And to be honest with you, I don't think that's the case. What I think is it always seems that planning is at the center of everything. But I think the more you read, particularly about Egyptian military history, for example, the more you realize that planning is often lacking, communication is often lacking. It is not always planned. There are things that are beyond their control. And I think that's something that we always want to push to the edge of our thinking because we require particular explanation. So I think, is the army serious about reforms? Are they on the side of the people? I think the army, from the very beginning, was extremely unwilling to get involved. They are not happy about the situation that they're in. The armed forces in Egypt is a ginormous military-industrial complex. They make loads of money. The $2 billion that comes from the United States is mostly for them. Okay? So the fact that they have to stop doing what they're doing, to stop their agricultural projects, to stop their construction projects, to stop all the money making that they're involved in, I don't think they're happy about that at all. And that is why they are so keen to hand over to a civilian administration, whether or not it's the right thing to do within 6 months. So, are they serious about reform? I don't think it matters, to be honest with you, because they want to get back to making money and being a military-industrial complex, and they want to hand over to a civilian administration and leave that issue of reform up to them, in my opinion. Are they on the side of the people, or are they on the side of the state? I honestly don't think that they are on an anti-revolutionary footing. I don't think it's in their favor. I think it gives them a quagmire from which they will find it extremely difficult to extricate themselves. And so I think it doesn't matter whether they're serious about reform, because actually they have a totally different agenda, which is to get back to securing the American military aid and making sure it still comes in, and making sure that they're still able to process it in the way that they have been. And this is the issue about the central state security. In those documents is all the dirt about this military-industrial complex. And that is why it may have appeared that they were extremely reluctant for people to go in and even save those documents, because those documents implicate them as well. Okay. There is this benevolent attitude towards the army in Egypt, because it's a post-colonial state, because it's a conscript army, and the army is the center of life for many, many people. Everybody goes through it. They have never turned their guns on people, and so on and so forth. All that, that lovely story. In terms of advocates of the regime, the first question, I think, is a very serious question, and I've been speaking to a lot of friends, and this actually is a problem throughout the Middle East. It's not just a problem in Libya, it's also a problem in Egypt, it's also a problem in Tunis. The people who advocate for the regime are different in each case, but there are plenty of them. And it's simply because there is a huge financial and political machinery behind every single one of these regimes, which is an incentive for people to covet the regime. 2 months ago, nobody would have thought twice about coveting the regime in Egypt. It's just something that you had to do. To get along. And similarly in Libya, and similarly in Tunis, and similarly in Yemen. And so yes, we do have this problem, and that's why I was asking this serious question about what do we do? There are groups in society that have a stake in these regimes surviving. What do we do about it? Have we taken